Hey, Jacob, how's it going?
Hello, mate. Yeah, good. I have got my camera working. I think. I think it is working. I mean, I'm moving and I'm moving on the screen. It doesn't look, it looks better than my web. I've got the camera working. Hello, everybody. Goodness knows if it will stay working, but we can only hope.
Yeah, nice. Happy
Ah,
Thursday. Good to be here again.
yes.
Chatting this.
Happy Thursday, Pete. Guess what? I've got my camera working.
I
It's
know.
great.
So
It's
just
working.
just before everyone
It's
signs off,
working.
this whole episode won't be about Jacob's camera. Although we could do it behind the scenes on what gear we're using. But no, this isn't about Jacob's camera. We are actually chatting about creating a community platform, part one. So this is Jacob's part one. So for those who don't know, we've mentioned it before, but we kind of take turns in leading a session and kind of going from there. So I'm going to let Jacob take the lead on this one. So Jacob, creating a community platform, we've got multiple parts. It's a big topic, which is understandable. Let's jump in.
Yeah,
What are we doing?
absolutely. It's so when we're approaching any kind of platform design or development, but today we're particularly talking about obviously community platforms.
Yeah.
When we're starting conversations about bespoke platforms, and this is bespoke platforms,
Yeah.
we're talking about here. The conversation always comes down to what's the process.
Mm-hmm.
How is it going to work? How are we going to go through this? How are we going to learn about things and things like that? We have within our proposals and presentations and things like that, we have varies between like a 3 and 5 step process. So let's just go for 4, which is discovery and definition.
Yeah.
Which is essentially establishing what the end result will look like. Qualifying the brief and things like that. We then have a design phase, which is putting the visuals together for the actual product itself. Then we have kind of build phase, and then we have our test and data migration and deployment kind of phase. It's that phase that can get split out into the 5th if the data migration is massive.
Yeah.
Or the test is massive. So I just thought it would be really useful for us to be able to run through those.
Yeah.
It also might help inform. I think it was last week was it last week we did our Q&As as well. One of the questions was around Guild shutting down.
Yeah.
And I spoke about how hopefully this might be useful for kind of defining what that product is. You might get some insights, not necessarily if it has to be bespoke, but for anything, it's kind of just defining those features. So that's it. I thought we'd just go through that process. So part 1 is all around that discovery and definition phase. So what it takes to ideate, define, design and build, and so on. So that's what we're talking about.
I've been running a software development company since 2011. And I used to think probably 5-6 years ago, the hard bit of delivering a project is phase 2 and 3, designing and building it. They are really straightforward. Designing and building a project is not the hard bit. The hard bit is discovery, working out what we're building, and delivery, making sure it's delivered in a way that the client doesn't just receive like a grenade. They actually receive something which they've been well onboarded onto. That's the hard bit. Anybody can design and build. That's not the tricky bit. And I was just gonna say, I think we've learned the more successful projects we deliver are the ones where we've spent more and more time in the discovery phase. And what we tend to find is the more experienced folk we work with in terms of clients, so folk who have been there, done that in terms of building out websites and platforms, they know that while they may be spending days in workshops and discovery and understanding the scope, functional specs, and all that stuff, it can be tedious. If you don't absolutely nail that section, you're in for just a world of hurt later on down the line.
If we talk about agencies for a moment, or development agencies and things like that, if someone tells me that the design phase or the development phase is the hardest part of a project, I know they haven't done this.
Or they're not building hard things.
there's that as well. To be fair, there is that as well. But like, if it's a large kind of thing, it's because this side of things has not been done.
Yeah.
You leave people with assumptions. You leave ideas unexplored, so you actually don't know how they work. Context is a massive thing that this helps just provide, and things. So yeah, for sure.
It's a classic Abraham. I think it's Abraham Lincoln, isn't it, or someone? I can't remember.
Oi, that's coming up. That's coming up later.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Coming up. I mean, we could talk about it now, but yeah. Go on, Pete. Dive in, because I reference it now, and then we'll talk about it later.
If I'm asked to chop down a tree, I'll spend most of my time sharpening the axe.
Essentially, that's exactly it. It's Stephen Covey references it as the seventh point for 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, as well. And it's that taking the time to truly think and plan for what you're doing achieves far greater success and a smoother journey in what you're trying to do than necessarily just tirelessly like slogging away and trying to do it. So that sharpening the axe is going to crop up a lot in this.
Go on then. So let's start there. So why do we do this phase? We've kind of mentioned it in touch there, but any more detail on why we actually bother doing a discovery phase, definition stage?
Yeah. So specifically for community platform development and design is you have a wide variety of communities. You have it's not just an out the box thing. There is going to be a lot of features that overlap and things. So we often find the similar sort of stuff crop up of one-to-one messaging, group messaging. We've got forum communication. We'd like to have a resources area, things like that. But the way that they interact and how they kind of handle things are often very different. Also, the data you want to gather, the different processes and formats of how engagement might be handled, what kind of engagement you might be handled, what kind of there's so much to consider. So when you're approaching and you've put an idea together for a community platform, things like that, it's a great place to start. You need to have the idea to kick things off. This is what I want to. This is what I kind of want to build, and it's that it's that entrepreneurial sort of thought of this is kind of what I'd love in the end. That sort of stuff. But so this phase is taking that and your creativity and excitement and things there, and putting real functional parameters around it, real clear, okay, right, we're looking to do that, so this is what we then need to do here. It's essentially, you might have the idea which is going, I want to build a house on this area of land and things like that. This phase then goes, okay, right, how big is the house going to be? Where exactly on this plot is it going to be? Let's move a few feet this way away from that stream, and things like that. It's about really putting in the foundation for the growth of the platform. Ideas are great from a concept perspective, but without going through this, like, they're still just an idea. You need to start defining them. How does everything connect together? And it really is that sharpening of the axe before you, I told you it will come back up, sharpening of the axe before you kind of move forward. But also what it does is, if you're building this as part of a team, you've got multiple stakeholders involved, which we very much always find. So the kind of budget levels and companies that we work with, there are multiple players involved in this who are going to have a decision. And actually, I highly recommend that you do have that anyway. So you might be a community manager in a company and brand. You've been tasked to create this product. It would still be useful to speak to head of sales, head of marketing, head of operations, support, and things like that, and have multiple people within it, because then they can speak into their own areas. But what this define and discovery phase does is it puts down on a piece of paper, here is what the end product is going to be. And it means everyone is aligned. There are no surprises. Assumptions are completely removed, because that is the worst, is when I assumed it did this, and be like, okay, great. I don't think we've spoken about that before at all. And things, maybe you're moving from a licensed platform that you're already
Yeah.
using, and therefore it just hasn't been described. So this is really about defining that down to make sure everyone's on the same page. That's very much why we do this.
So what you've mentioned is a real mix of black and whiteness, but also ethereal idea generation and, let's get out some post-it notes. It's a real mix of that. So how does it work in terms of going from everyone write down your dream, your vision, your goals, and kind of whittling that down until you get something that's black and white, where you, the agency, your manager, every stakeholder agrees that a pig is a pig and a cat is a cat and a dog is a dog, like that you agree what you're building is what you're building. How do you get from A to B?
So it's literally my role is like here is facilitating that and then putting that down on paper and things like that. So, but you need to have trust in the people that you work with as well. So after us delivering it, there's a little bit of onus on me to make sure we capture that, and I lead things out well as obviously working with Ross, our amazing ops director, and yourself getting involved, and the dev team and design team. From our side, we still have multiple people getting involved with things and working in it as well. But there's just a lot of back and forth. So the way that it works, and what we kind of cover off in a discovery phase is you spoke about like post-its and ideas and things like that, is we run and host kind of like workshops for that to facilitate those ideas, the idea dumps. It literally post-its on a wall, or just huge conversations. Last time we did this, kicks off a few months ago. I think there were about 18 people in the room. And we were just walking through, and it was, from our side, we're the quiet ones, just asking probing questions to bring to get people talking and bringing stuff together. So we host and facilitate a range of workshops to kind of really do those idea dumps and reviews. That could be from reviewing the initial idea and going through all the fun stuff like crazy eights and design sprints and stuff, to if you defined a product. So a fantastic brief that we recently received, they had already gone through a little bit of a, here's what we want it to do, this is what it needs to do type thing. Well, the next phase for us for that is very much of being like, okay, that's what we need it to do, fantastic. So they're bits. How can we join these up? How can we make sure that they go into space? But we just need a dump of that. But it's also clearly defining objectives, setting expectations, working timelines. There could be a couple of days workshop. It could be a couple of hours with a few of them around. But the workshop is the mind dumps and data dumps. That then comes together, and then there's a range of other bits that need to come together as well. So this is all to inform and to provide context as to what the end product is going to be, remember. So these workshops are inform that. Budget and time frame are also two big ones that inform this. So if your budget is, let's say, £150,000, but within the scoping session and you're mapping out features, new things have cropped up based on that uncovering, be like, okay, great. Well, actually, what we've just discussed here is a £300,000. It's going to take us £300,000 to actually build it, and your timeline is 6 months. So actually, it's going to be a year and a half before we can deliver that. Right? Okay, cool. We need to reestablish that and reset expectations there. That's a really important point. Sorry, Pete, have you got something on that one?
I was going to say, so obviously there's a lot of work for you and the team that kind of go into this. And I think it's worth saying is, you mentioned a number there, £150,000. That's just it's an example.
Just off the cuff.
I know,
yeah.
But we're talking about larger projects, right? We're not building websites for your local butchers, which is why this phase is a phase that we charge for. Like, it's an important phase because a lot of thinking and doing goes into it. And I think a fair comparison would be, you wouldn't just appoint a builder to your house without having an architect, someone who's done technical drawing, someone that's done planning, someone that's done risk mitigation, all of that sort of stuff. And you wouldn't then invite an architect in to design you a house and then not pay them for it. Like, there's a lot of thinking that goes into it. Mm-hmm. My thought there would be, you are going to end up with a far better house if you've had an architect and someone actually think this stuff through. But also, because your builders don't have to do as much thinking, they only have to do doing, you're going to end up with a more efficient product in terms of time and budget. I think this isn't a section of the project you want to cheap out on. And we're not talking loads, but we are saying that if you pay the right people an amount of money to do some thinking for you in this phase, it will save you money later on, especially on a project which has 6 figures or more, because the thinking is the most important part. Because like we've already established, the doing is, most doing is doing, right? But it's the thinking behind it which kind of puts, that button into action, or that screen or that dashboard or that report into action, not just the fact that we can generate a button. It's the fact that what does that button actually do when you click on it? How does the user respond? What happens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. And particularly when there are so many other people involved within the room. If this is a multi-stakeholder thing, like, it's really important to get everyone aligned, because otherwise everyone's just going to end up, they weren't on the same page to start with. Yeah, exactly. So this is about doing that for sure. And that includes gathering stakeholder insights and things. So what do I spoke about different departments. What do the different team members and departments want out of this? What are they expecting? What are they wanting? Tell us about your current market and your other competitors, or I like to use the word similars, which usually means nothing until I explain it. But we do have clients go and be like, we have no competitors, and be like, okay, who's doing something similar? Let's talk about similarities then within things.
Nice.
And that, so much of that gives context to what we do and our production. I've kind of covered a chunk of things that we kind of cover off in the discovery phase. Bring me back, Pete.
There's a chunk of thinking there. So you're doing lots of thinking. You're taking ideas from somebody who's probably had them a long time. You're putting a fresh perspective on them, and you're laying them into something organized. So we've just had a workshop. You've gone away. You've done some thinking. You've brought some of the correct team members in. You've done some user research. Whatever needs doing. What should a client then expect to receive in return? You've done lots of thinking. What is kind of the end product of this spaghetti of ideas?
Nice. So what we do is we gather and capture all of this as best we can. Usually within, so our design tool of choice is Figma. That has a lovely sister product called FigJam, which is an online whiteboarding tool. If we go really specific within the tools and products that we do, within that we've got our photos, we've got our information capture, notes from the meeting. We preferably like to use record our meetings as well. Again, we use grain.com for that. On that, no affiliate link, just this a great tool. Highly recommend that. Within it, we can talk to them about affiliates later. And so we capture everything so it's in one place, because then if we need to refer to it in the future, to say, well, this is what we spoke about then, here it is now, it's just documented. Last thing you want is to keep everything in my mind, in your mind. So if I hosted a workshop for things, and then on my drive home I got hit by a bus, I'd be like, great, everything that Jacob ran through with the client is lost. Within that very morbid thing. Apologies. Moving on. But what we do next is we distill that, we sit on that, we do our own research and insights into things as well. And there might be more questions that come back and forth, but inevitably what you're going to end up is what we call a functional specification. Now, these are one of my favorite things in the world, where I have used, coming from a design background, I have genuinely had my design team be like, do you miss designing and things like that now? Because I don't do the actual hands-on design as much anymore. I still do, but I love it. But I was like, no, because I love writing functional specifications, and it's some of my design team's worst nightmare. Just loads and loads of pages of writing and things like that. But a functional specification is a clear document that is not a technical specification, but it is a user-centered document. And what I mean by that is, okay, there is this feature in the community platform. Let's give more of a general one, like a forum. That's a feature. So we say, here's the feature and things. Right. A requirement of this feature is number 1.1. As a member, I can search a forum for information. So it's the title of this requirement isn't forum searchability.
Yeah.
You're positioning yourself into a state of, as a user, I want to do this. That's the title. And then underneath, then you have your description. Be like, users can come to the forum. At the forum, they'll be able to click on a search box that allows them to search the title, the body copy, and the comments of the forum. So that's where the description lives. But 1.1 requirement of that feature is, as a user, I want to search the forum.
A less experienced Steadfast Collective would have just written search. A designer then would have put a rectangle in place, and then the developer would have had to gone, what am I searching? What's the priority in the results? What should the search box look like? What happens if there is no results? All of those things the developer then has to think about because no one else has thought about it. And by front-loading this thinking, you're giving the thinking to people that have already designed too many search boxes in their time, but also the people that have actually spoken to the client and the users and the members. So they know that when you put something in the search box, they actually don't want a result of it in chronological order. They actually want it in alphabetical order because for whatever reason, that is the way they search data, as a poor example. But letting the developer choose that is just a world of hurt. And we've been there and we've done that. And that's what we would have done 5 years ago. And there's a reason why we don't do that now.
And this is it. One of the things I very purposefully said in that description there was, within the description was, they can then search the title, the body copy, and comments. If you tell someone to put a search box into a website, what they're going to do is they're going to search the title of that page and then the body copy on that page. Comments wouldn't have been included. So this is where you get really specific, but from a user perspective, because then what it means is, great, okay, cool, there's this search item. It's then up to the developer to then go, right, we've got this search item. I know what the user is now trying to do. Right, actually, you know what? We don't want just a MySQL search. We want to use a Melee search or Algolia or something like this. That doesn't need to be defined based on, like, in a brief. We don't need that in a brief.
User doesn't care,
search item. The user doesn't care about that. That's absolutely right. As a user, I want to do this. So everything that we've had and we've discussed comes into a functional specification. So the latest functional specification that we did has 15 features. So feature, the description, and then they have then a range of between 1 and 14 requirements in them. And if we go from a user authentication journey, this would be something like, as a user, I am going to log into the platform. Description of that is, user can add their email address and password. It'd be super simple. But then the next one underneath that would be, as a user, I've forgotten my password.
Sure.
The description of that and things. So actually, just from a login journey, you've got 7 to 8 requirements that are really broken down in a detailed way. So it's going hyper specific within it. So that's one of the things we deliver.
Yeah, I mean, and that is probably the most important thing we do deliver when doing this planning. And I think what might be helpful is in our summer break is if we took some of the more generic elements from some functional specs we've written and create an example one, because that would be probably quite an interesting download of because that user that authentication, for instance, doesn't give away anything about a particular client. So we could make some stuff generic, give you some example of what you should expect from your team if you're working with an outside team building a bespoke platform.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea.
Little summer homework for you while you're by the beach.
That's all right. I mean, we've already got that. I just want to touch upon one other thing though, which is really important to consider, is that within the world of UX and things like that, you've got parties who are really heavy when thinking about the user. Of it has to be about the user. It's really important to be about the user. Things like that. In our discovery and define sessions, we're a little bit more open-minded in that, because we also know you have to make money or to actually be able to have value come back from this as a business, and that's often forgotten about or pushed back on, which is weird in my mind from like UX studios and things like that. So part of the definition of what we do is not just about the user requirements, but what are the goals we want to see, whether that's financial or growth or traffic or retention or lead-ons, whatever it might be, is a massive thing here that is really important, because that will also define the functional spec. As an example, part of the goals is we want to have more revenue streams. For that, part of that we'd love to be able to elevate our partners and sponsors a little bit more within our network. Great. Well, part of that is defining as a user, I will see a feed of latest forum posts when I initially land on my dashboard. Description of that might be you'll see title, snippet of information, date things were post, how many comments are on things, blah 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 blah, for each individual post. We will also need users will also have a requirement to see a featured ad within that, which can have a link added to it, which they can click on and then be moved off to. So it's not just it's about how the user engages and what users will experience and interact with, rather than necessarily just the single UX requirements and things there. There's so much more to touch upon. I think what I'll do is I'll touch, like we start to then move into part 2, which is the actual designing of these kind of items. But there's a few things else that we deliver within the design discovery phase. I'm going to touch upon those in my next chat, because actually I feel they have great relevance to that anyway, which is around design. That includes things like site maps, content hierarchy maps, and wireframes. So that's because I know that we're approaching time. Nice. So we can go from there.
So to summarize, if you're building something substantial, if you're building anything, you need to do some thinking and definition discovery around it. It's important you sharpen the axe. Doing it now will save you time and pain doing it later. You need to make sure the right people are involved, and you need to make sure that the document you receive from your agency, from your whatever you're working with, is really clear and concise and explained in the functional spec, what's happening from a user's point of view. Make sure you include, make sure your goals are known, and make sure that they are nodded to in that as well. There's no point having a platform which is just about the users if your goals are going to be ignored. But I think the key thing here is clarity, because if there's not clarity in this phase, it's going to be painful later on.
You nicked my Abraham Lincoln quote, so I'm going to do another one, which is by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail.
Michael Scott.
Which is, that does sound like Michael Scott, to be fair, but no, it's Benjamin Franklin, that one.
All these old American presidents.
Yeah, I know. Was Ben Franklin the president?
I don't know, actually. My American history is not very good.
I don't think he was. But essentially, that is everything that we're doing here is preparation, definition, and clarity. You're absolutely right.
And just if anybody was wondering, he's a founding father, not a president.
There you go.
And that is a perfect place to finish. Cool. Thank you, Jacob. I appreciate you doing that. Looking forward to seeing your homework after August, which is putting together an example functional spec. And see you next week.
Cracking. See you next week.